Hello there, here with Martin Goldberg from Silverman Radio. Hope you're doing well. Today we'll be talking about Stefan Molyneux, a very interesting character. So years ago, I stumbled on some of his content, and I listened to it. I didn't like the sound of his voice, and I switched it off. Yeah. And then, a little bit in the future, a roommate told me, he's got this amazing research on Trayvon Martin, you gotta take a look. So I did, and I gained more respect. This is back when he was working with Mike, the assistant. They had those really long documentary-style videos like Truth About the Indians, Truth About Romans. Even if they were a little bit biased in some respects, you would learn something if you paid attention. So for 4 or 5 months there, in I want to say 2014, 2015, I was really steeped in his videos. But then I realized he had begun shifting towards being this Tucker Carlson outrage commentator for the plural right wing, and I lost interest. Other content creators have done the same thing. I know what their reasoning is, but I'm not going to waste my time looking at stuff that I could just as easily get on Fox News, which I don't watch, by the way. So Molyneux got started, I want to say, at the very beginning of YouTube, like 2006, and he was promoting Ayn Rand-style objectivism, libertarianism, which obviously has a limited global audience. Many people will say they're libertarian, but they don't want to take on the responsibilities of living in such a world. He wrote a book, Universally Preferable Behavior, which I've read, and it's decent, but there are some flawed arguments within, which I know that in of itself is not an argument. But in any case, there is a general perception on the internet that Stefan Molyneux has always had these delusions of grandeur. He wanted to be an epic philosopher, but he could never really break out of I think it was 250,000 subscribers or so, until he began shilling for Donald Trump. And even his love of the free market was never reciprocated by the system or the followers. So you can look at this, or actually this is just a quick meme, it's kind of funny. All aspects of personality influenced by genetics. Both of my parents are institutionalized. True Shibes used to comment on my channel. I don't know what happened to him or her, but there's a number of these clips where Molyneux, he didn't like doing the corporate ads on YouTube. I don't know why people are so sensitive about that, because at this point, as I predicted, it doesn't matter whether you monetize or not. They're still running ads. You might as well squeeze some out of the machine. But he had this video, if we just could do ads, we'd make like $150,000 a year. And donations, which is what he preferred, many folks were not exactly rewarding him by valuing him at a high premium in the market. Now, I'm sure there's some who donate $100 a month, but this person donated like 50 cents. And they say they did this little segment. They were kind of passive-aggressive, whining about it. You go down here, Mike L., he is pissed that the free market values his work as 50 cents. Usually he loves the free market, but not when he is valued by it. And it's true. Even people who claim they're libertarian or anarchists, they don't like having to operate in that system. They don't want to really reward folks. A guy like this, if he's one of the most renowned libertarians on the internet, you should probably be donating, if you can afford it, like $50 a month. Or at least donating, the cost of a gym membership. But they don't really want to do that because, well, even the right-wing people who believe, you shouldn't take anything, they have the entitlement mentality when it comes to the internet. Everything should be free, right? Even the content creators, I did a video on this some years ago, how they all started complaining about they were being demonetized by YouTube. These are the same people pushing for classical liberalism and libertarian economic policies, which means you can't tell a private company, you have to let this person use your platform. You can't ban them. You can't demonetize them. I mean, yeah, if you're talking about IQ, maybe the United Colors of Benetton doesn't want to run ads on your page. It's just this whole contradiction where people, they want freedom, but they don't want enough freedom to where they can potentially lose money or not make money. So if you compared him to Jordan Peterson, who has a much bigger sense of a following or popularity, Peterson benefits in a way from being a tenured professor. So maybe if Molyneux had gotten a PhD and at McGill University he was like a professor of objectivism, he had that tenure, he would be secure there, and he would be able to. Having tenure is not exactly like living on welfare because you have to work, but it is a certain security people don't get in the free market. But it allows you to just spread ideas. Whereas Molyneux was the philosopher who could not really generate as much money as he wanted by promoting the free market. So it's just kind of interesting how that plays out. And so, despite Molyneux being a big libertarian, around 2014, 2015, we begin to see the transition. And this is how he picked up on shilling for Donald Trump. Just so you know, there was a video from back in probably 2012 where he was mocking Romney and Paul Ryan, their budget proposal. Well, that's cowardly. You're just trying to use tuition. You should be just cutting all those jobs. And then when Trump's budget came out, he was shilling for Trump's budget, even though Trump's budget was not a balanced budget. It wasn't cutting $1 trillion. It was just like, defund this, put some ads on PBS. It's not like a real Ron Paul budget or anything of that nature. But much like Styx Hexenhammer, he did the same thing. Hexenhammer had been on YouTube for probably 7 or 8 years by the time Trump rolled around. He was mainly into the occult, promoting progressivism and libertarianism, and then all of a sudden he just jumped on the Trump bandwagon. And you could see the transition. Now, in fairness to the guy, he was trying to make a living, he's making multiple videos a day, but you could see how he started shilling for boomer conservatives. Like, his analysis of the Colombian presidential election was just dead wrong. He's like, they're rejecting socialism for free markets. No, they were angry about the peace agreements, the FARC, which goes well beyond socialism at this point because they're actually drug dealers. They're not really leftists per se. And then I remember when Gorsuch got nominated, he was like, now liberals, calm down. He's replacing Scalia. It's not going to change the balance of the Supreme Court. If it was, I would oppose it. I was like, okay. Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Growlsburg dies. Styx goes, of course you should confirm Barrett without delay. And this is what happens when you have to shill for the boomer conservative audience. That's why I never went that route. As soon as I started getting people who were telling me I had to have this opinion or this talking point, I was like, yeah, screw off. I'm not interested in it. So I'm a small channel, but that's what happens. If you want to really be authentic, you often have to be at peace with the fact you're not going to be super famous. You can't be independent-minded. You have to be a shill if you really want to get a big follower and make money, okay? And that's what Molyneux did with Donald Trump. Trump is not really a libertarian. Trump did a lot of things that are not in favor of libertarians at all, but because he was the guy fighting the SJWs, he was the headline guy, Molyneux started supporting him. And then more recently, Molyneux got into the whole IQ debate. I don't know how much to say about this. I know there's a clip where Ruben's like, so what you're saying is black people have smaller brains. Well, yes, and it's actually quite a tragedy. But I've read, I forget what her name is, the book Superior, which was, of course, anti all this stuff. I've read Edward Dutton. I've looked at different sources. I still really don't know. Like, I don't know if I know, honestly. I come to the conclusion that the people who are really focused on IQ, I don't think it's so much that they care about having a high IQ society. There are some outcomes you can point to and claim. I think it's more of the fact where this group of people does not want to be in close proximity to this other group of people, or at least not many of them. Because you start talking about IQ, like the RAISE Act was an example of that. We're going to give points based upon how many degrees you have. But a lot of the people churning out PhDs are Indian subcontinent and Asia. So even if you think, and then actually some parts of Africa are turning out a lot of PhDs. So even if you think this is going to eliminate us being flooded with a bunch of low IQ immigration, you might just have a bunch of concentration of people you don't really want to live with anyway. Because a lot of the people who promote IQ, realistically, they want more Europeans. Now, not all Europeans are necessarily high IQ. I've always thought of it, what if when you have the Irish potato feminism, they, instead of going to the US, many of them had gone to Mexico and they became like 45, 50% of the population. Because Ireland lost, I think, the majority of his population. It's a really interesting story, and kind of sad too. So what if today there were these short, drunk Irish guys coming over the border to get jobs, there would probably still be people against illegal immigration, but there would be less of that demographic concern. Oh, this is going to change our demographics. They're going to start voting for more liberals or whatever, even though the Irish ended up voting for liberals anyway. Or you could take some people from Eastern European countries. They're not necessarily super high IQ. But if there were more Slavs, would people complain as much if there were more Slavs? Because, let's be real, demographically, they're more in line with the dominant group. That's honestly the case. So I think if that's the big issue for you, you would focus more on how do you create that sort of environment? Because if you just do it on the basis of IQ or education, there's a lot of high IQ people who are not necessarily of this certain ethnicity you want. So if that's your viewpoint, if that's the opinion you hold, you should focus more on, okay, we just want to live in this way, regardless if it's low or high IQ people. But like I said, I don't know enough about IQ itself to really speak confidently. I think it has some role, but I also believe it's very difficult to pinpoint and build policy around. So more investigation has to be done. And then the other thing he got big on was all these women, they just don't have enough eggs. Now, I get the argument, and it's an interesting dynamic with many people, right-wing, Manospirian. They tend to be economic conservatives and libertarians. They support that system. Yet, they don't understand how that system contributed to what we see today. There's a couple of different factors here. So before we get into the economics itself, let's just talk about population. The main reason why in the 1950s you had all these trad women supposedly had a lot to do with a sort of unbalanced dating market. In the 20s and 30s, you can go back and look at this. There was a lot of information pushing women into don't settle down, hook up with different men, have fun, be independent. That changed largely because of the Second World War. America lost an estimated 400,000 men. Other countries, UK I think was 350,000. If you count India, it was over 650,000. France lost a lot of people. Germany lost like 5 million men. Italy lost a good 200,000 or 300,000. Japan lost 2 million. Okay, why does this matter? There were less American men available, and the American GIs had a lot more in the way of options. You look at like a 17-year-old Italian village girl. Okay, this American dude's only 5'7", but he's a ticket out of this country that is blown to hell apart and very poor. Japan, despite all that martial culture, a lot of these women had lost their freaking husbands or opportunities for husbands, so they just jumped on with the American GIs. And so American women back home, not only they had less options, but they had to compete with many of these chicks, like the Japanese, who are far more conservative and feminine. So that's really what influences it. However, with the baby boomers, and then ultimately the gender gap tightens, that's when we begin to move into what we see today. Yeah, you had the Vietnam War, but we have yet to experience a major war or pandemic that wipes out a lot of men, young men, eligible men. And so that's what's contributing to it. It's not like they always were traditional and feminine. That's actually a massive gaslighting of guys by red pillars and even some MGTOWs. The next two factors are tightly connected to the economy. And so you've got technological change, right? You used to have to use a broom, and then you got the vacuum cleaner. Now you have the Roomba, you have microwaves, toaster ovens, you have Swiffer, you've got Freshly, Blue Apron. The whole idea of, I'm just going to stay home and cook and clean, that is kind of obsolete. Many of them are just going to be bored at home. So with all this technology, even just appliances, they have more opportunities to be freed up and to work. And it's interesting, these guys support capitalism, but they think you can exclude like 50% of the population from having jobs or even getting education because that'll make them feminists. That's why they blame hypergamy or the sexual revolution. But the pill ultimately came from private investment, private effort. And that's why it's so widespread. That's why people make a profit off of the pill. It's not like the government created. If the government created the pill, it would probably be very ineffective and people would be getting pregnant all the time. Um, those economic changes helped women have opportunities they wouldn't have experienced under, let's say, a feudal system or under a system where they were tied to the land and agriculture. So you have to appreciate this stuff. You can't just keep blaming these, abstract villains, hypergamy or feminism. This is only made worse with modern technology like dating apps. So it's easy to say, these women, they're not traditional, they're not feminine, but look at the economic system you're shilling for. You cannot have capitalism and then say we're going to take away economic rights from half the population. It's just not going to work. Many of them, they are going to get jobs. They do have jobs. They're going to have disposable income, and they're going to want to spend it on makeup and other such nonsense. You have to figure out how you're going to address the economic question. Technology is difficult to control in of itself, but the economy especially. If you have this free, open economy, it's not a perfect free market, but it's capitalistic in nature. How do you prevent women from making their own money, getting their own property, and saying, well, screw you, I don't have to settle for less, I'm going to raise my standards. Just like if you come from some backwater town where all the women are like 350, and then you go into the Air Force, you do cyber, you're making 100,000, you're living in a better area, you're probably not going to settle for the land whales anymore. A lot of these women, the reason their standards are so high is because they can afford to be. You don't have a shortage of men outside of college campuses, or just a shortage of ability to make money as a woman. That means, of course, they're going to be like, I don't need to get married now, I don't have to settle down. I've never heard a Manospherean or a Red Pillar seriously address this. It's always some silly, don't let them vote, or, well, they can't have jobs, but we can still have capitalism, and, even though capitalists would want to use them perhaps as cheap labor in some cases, as they have in the past, it's always convoluted. It makes no sense. So ultimately, guys like Molyneux have to make that decision. Do you want this economic system which gives you a lot of benefits but also some drawbacks? Or do you want a less free economic model, a less socially loose model? But perhaps you'll have, over time, some of these problems could be dealt with. I mean, it's difficult. I've never understood the idea, because Molyneux himself, despite being an atheist and a libertarian, he's told women who call on his show, well, you can marry a Christian man. Like, he still has those socially conservative inclinations, but I've never understood how you can take classical liberalism, which is about all this, deregulation, less control, especially if it's the conservative form, not the Gladstone, social reform aspects, and then marry it to social conservatism. It's not going to work. They're not compatible over the long run, especially as technology changes. So that's what right-wing people, Molyneux, others have to address if they really want to save the West.